My name is Catherine, and I never thought I'd be the mother standing by the window on Christmas Eve watching someone else's child laugh while mine was still missing. It's been 6 months since Benji disappeared. 6 months since the night I screamed his name into the snow and no one answered. Tonight, my stepdaughter, Lila, found something in a box under the tree. A toy train. It used to be Benji's. She looked up at me and whispered, "I'm scared. So am I. But this time, I won't look away." Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button, subscribe, and if you've ever had to fight for the truth in your own family, stick around. This story is for you. The house smelled like cinnamon, pine, and vanilla frosting. Lila had helped Richard bake cookies earlier while I was upstairs sorting through boxes we hadn't opened since we moved in. She was humming carols, completely in her own little world, while colored lights blinked from the tree behind her. Outside, snow fell in quiet sheets, blanketing the yard like some holiday postcard. But inside me, there was no peace. I stood near the fireplace, watching her. 8 years old, full of life, with the kind of innocence Benji once had. The two of them used to run around this very room in their pajamas, pretending the couch was a pirate ship. That was before everything changed. "Mom?" she called, holding something small and dusty in her hands. This was Benji's, wasn't it?" She walked over slowly, cradling the little wooden train like it might crumble in her palms. I froze. The toy hadn't been in the house since June. I took it from her gently. My heart pounded in my ears. The wheels were chipped, the paint faded, but I would have known it anywhere. Benji loved this train. He used to carry it around like a talisman. It had vanished the same night he did. I knelt down, trying to stay calm. "Where did you find this?" "In that red box under the stairs," she said quietly. "The one with the Christmas stuff." That box had been packed and sealed in our old house. I remember taping it shut myself. It had never been opened since the move. But the toy was here. I looked at her and saw it. Pure, wide-eyed fear. Not because of the train, but because she could sense something wasn't right. Children know more than we give them credit for. "I'm scared," she whispered again. I forced a smile, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's okay, sweetheart. Thank you for showing me." Then I stood up and went into the kitchen, trying to hide the tremble in my hands. Richard was icing the last batch of cookies. "Everything all right?" he asked, glancing at me. I hesitated. "She found one of Benji's toys. The train." He paused. "In the Christmas box?" I nodded. His face went still. We hadn't talked about Benji in weeks. It was easier to bury it, to pretend. That's what everyone around me wanted, to move on, to let the system handle it. But how do you let go of your child? I opened the drawer by the sink and pulled out the card from Detective Moore. He'd told me to call if anything unusual came up. At the time, I thought it was just something people say, a formality. Now it didn't feel like a formality at all. Richard put his hand over mine. "Are you sure you want to go through this again?" "I never stopped going through it," I said. He nodded slowly, then leaned in and kissed my forehead. As I picked up the phone, I glanced back toward the living room. Lila was curled up on the rug, the toy train beside her, staring into the lights like they might show her something safe. And I realized something I hadn't let myself feel in months. Hope. It was small, fragile, like the whisper of Benji's laugh echoing through an empty hallway. But it was there. I dialed the number. The call rang twice before a voice picked up. "Detective Moore," I said, gripping the edge of the counter. "I think we may have found something." Detective Moore arrived just after 10. His coat was dusted with snow and his breath formed little clouds in the cold air as I led him inside. Richard offered him coffee. He declined politely, eyes already scanning the living room. I handed him the train, wrapped carefully in a kitchen towel. "This was his," I said. "It disappeared the night he did. It wasn't in this house until tonight." Moore turned the toy over in his hands like it might speak. He was a man of few words, the kind who measured everything before he said it. After a long pause, he looked at me. "Was there any chance someone unpacked a box without telling you?" "No, that box came straight from the movers. We sealed it in the old house, weeks before he went missing." He nodded, then set the train down on the coffee table. "Can I see the box?" I led him to the basement steps. Lila had fallen asleep on the couch. I didn't want her hearing any more of this. Richard followed us quietly, the weight of it all etched across his face. The red storage bin sat on the concrete floor near the water heater. Its lid was half off now, Christmas ornaments and tinsel spilling out like a memory cracked open. Moore crouched beside it, examining the contents. He pulled out one of Benji's old mittens. I hadn't even noticed it was there. My chest tightened. "How could these things get here?" I whispered. Richard put a hand on my shoulder, but I pulled away gently. Moore stood up, his brow furrowed. "Is there anyone else who would have had access to this box before the move?" I hesitated. There was a name sitting on the edge of my mind like a splinter. Hazel. My sister had helped pack, briefly. She showed up late that day, said she couldn't stay long. She'd been off for months, distant, irritable. I chalked it up to stress, financial trouble, that hollow look in her eyes I couldn't quite place. I hadn't spoken to her in over a month. "No one besides the movers," I lied. I didn't want to believe it. Not yet. Moore gave a slow nod. "We'll have the toy tested, see if there's anything, fibers, prints, you know the drill." I did. Too well. He handed me his card again, same number, same worn edges. "Try to get some sleep," he said. As he left, I closed the door behind him and leaned against it. The wind howled outside. The snow kept falling. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of Benji's empty bed. His blanket was still folded, his books still lined up on the shelf by color, the way he liked them. 8 years old and already a creature of quiet order, just like me. I held the train in my lap and traced the worn wheels with my thumb. There was a little chip near the front. He used to say that chip was from fighting dragons. Dragons. I'd faced plenty since he disappeared. Doubt, blame, whispers behind my back. The silence in my own marriage, the way people stopped calling, stopped asking. Grief has a way of isolating you. People think it's contagious. Like if they get too close, your pain might rub off on them. But now, for the first time in 6 months, I wasn't just grieving. I was angry. Someone had touched my son's things. Someone had opened that box and planted a memory inside it. That meant Benji was still close enough to be hurt again, and I would burn the world down before I let that happen. The next morning, the snow was still falling. Thick, silent sheets like the world wanted to cover itself up and forget everything. I couldn't forget. Detective Moore returned just after sunrise, this time with a young officer named Perez and a plastic evidence kit that made my stomach twist. They dusted the toy train first, then the box, then every surface it might have touched. I hovered by the edge of the room, arms crossed tightly, trying to stay still. Richard poured coffee for everyone. Lila stayed upstairs with cartoons and a bowl of cereal, unaware her living room had become an unofficial crime scene. Moore glanced over at me while Perez worked. "You mentioned the box came from your old place. Do you remember when it was packed?" "Mid-May," I said. "Before school let out, I labeled every bin myself. Did anyone help you pack?" I felt the pause in my throat before I even said her name. My sister, Hazel. It felt strange saying her name out loud, like calling out into a canyon and not knowing what might echo back. Moore looked at me carefully, not accusing, just cataloging. "Was she close with your son?" I hesitated. "She used to be when he was little, before I met Richard, before things got complicated." He waited, letting the silence do the asking. "She's had some rough years," I continued. "Lost her job, moved twice. We drifted." "It happens." Moore nodded, then turned his attention back to the box. He didn't say it, but I could feel the words forming behind his eyes. Drifted. Financial trouble, proximity. Suspicion blooms quietly, like frost crawling across a window pane. Perez stood up. "No prints on the train besides the girls. Smudges on the box lid. Could be old." Moore gave a short sigh. "Bag everything anyway. Maybe the lab will surprise us." He started to walk toward the door, then turned back. "Would it be okay if I asked Hazel to come in for a conversation?" I blinked. "She hasn't done anything." I didn't say she had, but if she was around those boxes before the move, it's worth clearing up. I nodded slowly. "I'll call her." But I knew she wouldn't pick up. Hazel hadn't answered my calls in over a month. Not after that last argument, the one about money. She'd asked for help with a rent deposit. I'd said no. Her voice had been cold, detached. "You have a whole new family now," she'd said. "Guess you don't need your old one." I tried not to take it personally, but words like that don't evaporate. They stain. And now they were resurfacing. After the officers left, I stood at the kitchen window, watching their footprints disappear beneath the falling snow. I could see Benji's snowman still standing in the yard. His crooked little smile, the scarf I'd knitted, the button eyes he insisted came from a secret agent's coat. I thought about the train, about the box, about the timing. If Hazel had touched that bin, if she had something to do with the toy's sudden reappearance, then she was either trying to help or trying to hurt me. Neither option sat well. I picked up my phone and scrolled to her contact. Her face appeared in the little icon, blurry and outdated, from a birthday 2 years ago, when we still smiled for each other. I hit call. It rang once, twice, straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I didn't need to. She would know why I was calling, and if she had anything to hide, she'd be scrambling by now. The voicemail greeting was still the same. Hazel's voice, too chipper to be real, followed by the obligatory beep and silence. I didn't call again. Instead, I drove. Her apartment was across town, tucked behind an old grocery store with a flickering neon sign that had once read open, but now only blinked pen. I parked and sat in the car for a long time, watching the second-story window I remembered was hers. The curtain was half drawn. A dim yellow glow flickered inside, like someone had forgotten to change the bulb. I thought about going up. Then I thought about the last time I stood outside that door. It was August, hot, sticky, and loud. Benji had just started camp. I'd brought Hazel a grocery bag filled with essentials, cereal, soap, a frozen lasagna I made myself. She met me at the threshold, didn't invite me in. "I didn't ask for this," she'd said flatly, eyeing the bag. "You said you hadn't eaten," I replied. "I said I was fine." That was always Hazel's line. Even when she was sinking, she'd grit her teeth and say she was fine. She had a way of folding her arms, chin tilted, that made her look defiant, until you noticed the cracks just below the surface. And I knew those cracks well. They mirrored the ones I used to hide. Growing up, Hazel was the delicate one, the one with asthma, the one who cried when her stuffed animals lost their eyes. I was the older sister, the fixer, the one who did the dishes, who stayed quiet when Mom criticized our clothes or when Dad disappeared into work for days. But something shifted as we got older. Hazel got lost. I got chosen. It wasn't intentional. I didn't ask to be the one who got out, who went to college, who landed a steady job, who married Richard and somehow built a life that looked functional, even if it never quite felt that way on the inside. And Hazel? She drifted. Jobs came and went. Apartments came and went. Men, too. Every time she asked for help, I gave it. Until I couldn't anymore. Last year, she called asking for money to hold her over. I'd just gotten the final bill from Benji's dental surgery. Richard was already stretched thin with Lila's school tuition. I told Hazel I couldn't do it this time. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just went quiet. Then she said, "You don't get to act like a saint, Catherine. You're not. You got lucky, that's all." I remembered hanging up, my hand shaking. Not out of guilt, but out of grief. For her, for me, for the space that had grown between us like a wound neither of us knew how to clean. Now I sat in the car again, staring up at that same window, and I felt that wound pulse. The snow had stopped falling. A thin fog hovered low along the sidewalk. No one walked past. No cars drove by. It was the kind of stillness that made you question if the world had paused just long enough for you to reconsider your next step. I didn't go upstairs. I didn't knock. I drove home. Sometimes silence says more than confrontation ever could. Hazel didn't want to be found. But I had the feeling she was already watching me somehow. And for the first time, I wondered if she had been watching all along. It was 2 days before Christmas when Detective Moore called me back. His voice was quieter than usual, slower, more careful. "We pulled Hazel's financial records. There's something I need you to see." He didn't say it over the phone. He didn't have to. I could hear it in the way he avoided the edges of his words, like stepping around broken glass barefoot. I drove to the station in silence, the kind that fills your chest and settles into your bones. Seattle was gray that morning, a sky thick with clouds and roads slick with melted snow. The kind of cold that didn't bite, but seeped. Moore met me in a side room, no windows, just a table, 2 chairs, and a stack of papers that looked like they had been handled too many times already. He slid one of them toward me. It was a printout of Hazel's bank statement. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to be looking at, until my eyes landed on a transaction circled in red ink. June 2nd, A deposit of $3,000, labeled only as personal transfer. I stared at it for a long moment. Where did it come from? I asked. Moore pulled out a second sheet. A woman named Donna Clay. Does that name mean anything to you? It shouldn't have. It had been years, but the name cracked something open in my brain. She's Benji's biological mother. He nodded. We traced the transfer to her account. She's living under a different address now. North Side. Low-income housing. She doesn't have custody of any children, and according to state records, she hasn't had legal contact with your son in over 7 years. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed. Donna. She'd disappeared when Benji was barely 2. No child support, no letters, just gone. I'd filed for sole custody and she never showed up in court, never fought me, just vanished. And now she was wiring money to my sister. Moore leaned forward, elbows on the table. His tone was steady, but there was something beneath it now. A tension, like a fuse had just been lit and we were both pretending it wouldn't burn. I don't want to jump to conclusions, he said, but this deposit came 2 weeks before your son disappeared. It's suspicious, to say the least. I shook my head, as if that could undo the last few seconds. Hazel would never hand Benji over to Donna. She knows what she's like. Do you? The question was soft. Too soft. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. The truth was, I didn't. I knew Donna as the girl Richard warned me about, reckless, wild, addicted to whatever would let her escape. She'd walked out on her son without a second glance, but that was almost a decade ago. People don't always stay gone. Sometimes they circle back, wearing new faces. Moore stood, slid the papers back into the folder. We'll bring Hazel in for questioning, and we'll put a quiet surveillance on Donna. We're not making arrests. Not yet. I sat there long after he left the room. My fingers were still curled around the edge of the table, gripping it like it was the only thing keeping me upright. $3,000. That's what my son was worth to someone, and the person who sold him might have shared my childhood bedroom. I hadn't been to my parents' house in over 4 months, not since Benji disappeared. Back then, the silence between us was held together by mutual exhaustion. The kind that comes when grief has worn out its welcome and all that's left are polite nods and shallow words. But now, I needed answers. Or at least, I needed honesty. The driveway was lined with neatly trimmed hedges, and the porch lights still had autumn-colored wreaths, even though Christmas was only days away. That was Mom, always 2 holidays behind, but still calling herself organized. She opened the door before I could knock. Her smile faltered the moment she saw my face. Catherine. I need to talk to you and Dad. She hesitated, then stepped aside. He's in the den, reading. Of course he was. The house smelled like lemon polish and something baking. Safe smells, innocent smells. I followed the scent down the hall, but nothing about this visit felt safe or innocent. Dad looked up from his chair, lowered the newspaper. Something wrong? I sat on the edge of the couch like a guest, like a stranger. I need to ask you both something. About Hazel. Mom's arms crossed instinctively. What now? Did she ever mention needing money this summer or seem off to you? They exchanged glances. Dad cleared his throat. She always needs money, he said. She's had a hard time. So did I said. I still do. Mom gave a tight smile. You've always landed on your feet. Hazel never had that luxury. I didn't land, I said. I fought for every inch. Dad leaned forward. Catherine, if this is about Benji, I think you need to take a step back. You're upset. We understand that. But dragging Hazel into this isn't going to bring him back. I blinked. I'm not dragging her into anything. There's a record, a money transfer, from Donna Clay to Hazel, 2 weeks before Benji disappeared. Mom's face drained of color, but she quickly masked it. That doesn't mean anything. It means everything, I snapped. Donna is not supposed to be anywhere near Benji, and Hazel took money from her. She wouldn't do something like that, Dad said. Not your sister. My voice broke a little. She's not the girl who braided my hair anymore. Silence. Then Mom, her voice sharper now. You've always judged her, Catherine. Ever since you married Richard, you act like you're better. I stared at her. I act like I want my son back. The room grew heavy, thick with all the words we'd never said. Dad looked away. Mom busied herself straightening the placemats on the coffee table that didn't need straightening. I stood up. I thought if anyone would be angry with her, it would be you. But I was wrong. You don't want the truth. You want quiet. Mom followed me to the door. You always make everything about you. I turned. Her eyes were cold, but not empty. Just tired. Worn down by years of excuses, of choosing peace over pain. So I gave her neither. I hope you never have to wonder if your grandchild was traded for a check. Then I left. The air outside bit through my coat, but I didn't notice. My car felt colder than the street. I sat behind the wheel and stared at the dashboard, trying to remember how to breathe. I wasn't just fighting for Benji anymore. I was fighting against the very people who were supposed to stand beside me. And suddenly, I wasn't sure which betrayal hurt more. Hazel showed up to the station in a wrinkled cardigan, chipped black nail polish, and that same expression she always wore when she felt cornered, half defiant, half exhausted. She didn't look surprised to see Detective Moore waiting for her, didn't even flinch when she was asked to sit down. Just crossed her legs, pulled her sleeves over her hands, and raised one eyebrow like the whole thing was an inconvenience. "Am I under arrest?" she asked, voice flat. "Not at the moment," Moore replied calmly. "We just have a few questions about a financial transaction you received in early June, from a woman named Donna Clay." Hazel blinked, slowly, like she needed a moment to recall the name. "I don't know anyone named Donna Clay." Moore didn't press. He slid a printed copy of the transfer across the table. "She sent you $3,000, June 2nd, to your personal checking account." Hazel stared at the paper but didn't touch it. "Looks like a mistake," she said finally. Moore leaned forward slightly. "You didn't think it was a mistake when the money landed, did you?" She smiled, a sharp little thing that didn't reach her eyes. "People send money all the time. Sometimes they're generous. Maybe it was a gift." Moore folded his hands. "We don't see many strangers gift that kind of money to people they've never met, especially people with shared history." "I told you, I don't know her." "You know Benji Hayes?" That landed harder than she expected. Her mouth opened, closed. Something flickered across her face. Not guilt exactly, but calculation. "Of course I do. He's my nephew." "Did you see him the week he disappeared?" Hazel's eyes narrowed. "I didn't have anything to do with that." "That wasn't the question." She paused again, then said, "No, I hadn't seen him in weeks." Moore nodded slowly. "Funny, because according to a neighbor of Donna Clay, a woman matching your description was seen near her building around that same time. And Donna? She doesn't have any friends. At least none who look like you." Hazel's foot began to tap, a subtle rhythm against the tile floor. Moore let the silence stretch, heavy and unmoving. He didn't need to raise his voice. That was the thing about good detectives. They let the truth do the shouting. Finally, Hazel spoke again. "Are you saying I kidnapped my own nephew?" "I'm saying someone paid you a suspicious amount of money. I'm saying a child went missing 2 weeks later. And I'm saying the woman who gave you that money has a long history of neglect and addiction. So if you're sitting there hoping this will blow over, I suggest you think again." Hazel's bravado cracked then. Just a little. She looked down at her sleeves, picking at a loose thread. The tapping stopped. "I didn't know she'd take him," she mumbled. Moore tilted his head. "What was that?" Hazel bit her lip, shook her head. "Nothing. I want a lawyer." He stood slowly. "Of course." The interview ended there. But Moore didn't need a confession. Not yet. He had something more valuable, a shift. The kind of hesitation that told him the story she was clinging to wasn't going to hold much longer. Outside the interrogation room, Moore handed the transcript to Perez. "Get surveillance back on Clay. I want eyes on her building, on any vehicle she touches, on anyone she speaks to. If she has the boy, we find him. Fast." Back at home, I stood at the kitchen counter, staring out at the snow-covered yard. My phone buzzed. A text from Moore. "We've spoken to Hazel. Things are in motion. Don't lose hope." I didn't reply, just stared out at the snowman Benji had built the year before. His scarf had blown halfway off, one of the button eyes was missing. And suddenly I knew. The story wasn't just unraveling, it was cracking open, and someone inside it was about to fall. Hazel came back to the station 2 days later. This time she brought a lawyer. He was young, nervous, probably fresh out of law school and already regretting this case. They sat across from Detective Moore in the same interview room. Same table, same overhead buzz from the flickering light. But the energy was different now. Hazel didn't ask if she was under arrest. She didn't make sarcastic comments or toss out half-truths. She sat still, arms folded, lips pressed into a straight line. She looked like someone trying to hold a dam together with bare hands. Moore didn't bother with pleasantries. "We have footage of your car parked across from Donna Clay's building the night before Benji disappeared. We have the money trail. And we have a sworn statement from one of her neighbors who saw you carrying a child wrapped in a red blanket." He let that sink in. "We're not asking if any more, Hazel. We're asking why." Her lawyer shifted in his seat. "My client has nothing further to say at this time." But Hazel leaned forward, eyes burning. "He wasn't supposed to disappear." Moore paused. "Go on." Hazel swallowed hard. Her hands trembled slightly. "I didn't think she'd keep him. I thought—" She blinked fast, trying to steady her voice. "I thought she just wanted to see him. For one day. Just one." "Donna?" Hazel nodded. "She found me through someone I used to work with. Said she'd been sober for a year. That she wanted a chance to explain things to her son. She said she'd pay me if I could. If I could bring him to her." Moore stayed quiet, letting her fill the space with her own guilt. "I didn't know what to do," Hazel whispered. "I was behind on rent. My car was dying. I couldn't ask Catherine again. Not after last time. Not after she looked at me like I was some stray she couldn't shake off." "So you took the boy?" Hazel's face crumpled. "I didn't take him. I asked to babysit. Catherine was overwhelmed that day. I knew she wouldn't say no. I picked Benji up from camp and drove him across town. Donna met us behind the gas station on 5th. Moore's voice was quiet now. "And you handed him over?" Hazel didn't answer right away. She stared down at her lap. "I told him we were going on an adventure, that we'd be back before dinner. And then? She gave me the envelope. I didn't even count it until I got home." Her voice cracked. "I thought she'd bring him back the next morning. I waited. I called. She stopped answering." Moore's jaw tightened. "Why didn't you report it?" Hazel looked up, tears brimming. "Because I was afraid. I was ashamed. And by the time I realized she wasn't going to return him, it had already been 3 days. I thought if I came forward, they'd arrest me. And Catherine? She'd never forgive me." Moore leaned back in his chair. "You're right about one thing." Hazel's lawyer placed a hand on her arm, but she didn't flinch. She sat there shaking, mascara smudged, sweater sleeves pulled over her fists like armor that no longer protected her. In the next room behind the glass, I watched the entire thing, every word. I had asked Moore to let me listen in. When she said the words, "I handed him over," something inside me went still. Not shattered. That had already happened. This was something colder, final. I wanted to rush in and scream. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and shake her until she understood what she had done. But all I could do was stand there, watching my sister confess to giving away my child like he was an object she no longer had use for. In that moment, I didn't see the girl I'd grown up with. I saw a stranger wearing her face. And I realized some betrayals aren't about anger, they're about erasure. Because now I knew. Hazel hadn't just broken my trust. She had erased a part of my son's childhood. A part I might never get back. They let me into the interview room after she signed her statement. Hazel sat slumped in the plastic chair like a kid called into the principal's office. Her sweater sleeves were pulled over her palms, her eyes red from crying, though the tears had long dried. She didn't look up when I walked in. The door clicked shut behind me, but the silence in the room was louder than any slam. I sat across from her, folded my hands in my lap, took a long breath. She still wouldn't look at me. "I need to hear it from you," I said quietly. "I need to hear you say what you did." Hazel's mouth twitched, but she didn't speak. "Say it, Hazel." Her eyes finally met mine, hollow, not angry, not defensive, just emptied out. "I gave him to her," she whispered. The words hung there between us, like a rope tightening. "You gave him," I repeated, voice sharp. Like he was something in a box of hand-me-downs. "I didn't think she'd take him forever." "You didn't think. That's the only thing you've said that's true." Hazel winced. Her fingers dug into her sleeves like she was trying to disappear inside them. "I needed help. We all need help," I snapped. But most of us don't sell our family to get it. It wasn't like that, she said quickly. She said she just wanted to see him. I didn't mean, no, you didn't mean, you didn't know. You didn't ask. I leaned forward, my voice trembling now. You handed my child to a woman who abandoned him, who walked away from him when he couldn't even form full sentences. And you thought what? That she'd bring him back with a balloon and a hug? Hazel's face crumpled, but I didn't stop. You watched me tear myself apart for 6 months. You watched me put up posters, call hospitals, beg strangers to care. And every day you said nothing. I was scared, she choked. No, I said, standing now. You were selfish. She looked up at me, tears breaking free again. Please, Catherine. I know what I did was horrible, but I miss him too. I froze. That word, too. I shook my head slowly. No, Hazel, you don't get to say that. Missing someone means you want them safe, home, breathing in the same air. You don't get to miss what you chose to lose. She covered her face, sobbing quietly now. But I didn't reach for her. I didn't feel sorry, I felt scorched. I trusted you with the most precious thing in my life, I said. And you sold him like he was a second-hand coat you couldn't carry anymore. Silence again. A long, bottomless kind of silence. Hazel wiped her eyes, smeared mascara across her cheek. She looked up, voice barely audible. I was drowning, Catherine. I didn't know what else to do. I stared at her for a long time. You ask for a hand when you're drowning, I said. You don't drag someone else under with you. She reached out then, a pathetic gesture, fingertips across the table like maybe I would take them. I didn't. I stepped back. She spoke again, shakier this time. Can you ever forgive me? I looked at her and thought about all the birthdays Benji missed, all the nights I sat by his empty bed, the sound of Lila asking if he was still in heaven even though I never told her he'd died. I thought about hope rotting in my chest for 6 long months, and I said nothing. I walked to the door, opened it. Before stepping out, I turned once. You're not my sister, I said, not anymore. Then I left. No slamming, no dramatic pause. Just the quiet click of a door closing behind a woman who was done begging people to be who they should have been. And somewhere deep inside me, something final broke loose. But in its place, something else took root. Resolve. Because this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The call came just after midnight. I was lying in bed, wide awake as usual, staring at the ceiling fan spin slow circles. Richard was asleep beside me, his breathing steady, the kind of steady I hadn't known in months. When I saw Detective Moore's name on the screen, I didn't hesitate. We found her, he said. I sat up. Donna? She's living in a rundown duplex just outside Rainier Beach. Been using her sister's name to rent it. Utilities are in someone else's account. She's been laying low. Is Benji there? We don't know yet. We're getting a warrant. Officers are already watching the house. If he's inside, we'll get him out. I didn't ask if I could come. I didn't need permission. By the time I arrived, the street was lined with black SUVs and unmarked sedans. Headlights dimmed, radios silent. The night air was thick with anticipation, like the world had stopped breathing just long enough to hear what would happen next. A young officer met me at the curb. You can't go any closer, ma'am. I'm his mother, I said, voice low but unshakable. He hesitated, then nodded toward a parked cruiser. You can wait there. Detective Moore will update you. I sat in the passenger seat of a police car for what felt like years, watching, praying. Every movement behind those faded curtains made my pulse spike. Then the radio crackled. A quiet voice. Warrant's in. Go. They moved fast. No lights, no sirens. Just purpose. 3 officers crept around the side of the house. Another 2 moved toward the front door. It was old, paint peeling, screen hanging loose on one hinge. One of the officers knocked. A long pause, then a loud bang. Police! No answer. A second bang, the door gave way. Inside, I couldn't see anything. Just the shadow of flashlights flickering through the thin curtains. Muffled voices, footsteps, a dog barking from somewhere down the block. Then silence again. Too long. I held my breath until my chest burned. Then a voice crackled through the radio. We have the boy. Repeat, we have the boy. He's alive. I didn't realize I was crying until my vision blurred the dashboard. Detective Moore appeared at the door. His face was unreadable. Is he okay? I asked. He's scared, a little thin, but no visible injuries. Can I see him? He nodded slowly. Give us a few minutes. We're bringing him out now. I stepped out of the cruiser and stood in the cold. The wind cut through my coat, but I didn't feel it. All I could hear was the sound of the front door opening again, and then I saw him, wrapped in a gray blanket, carried gently in the arms of an officer. His head rested on the man's shoulder, eyes half closed, face pale and unsure. "Benjy," I whispered. He turned toward the sound, blinking slowly. The officer set him down carefully. I knelt in the street, arms open. Benjy stared at me for a long second, like he wasn't sure if I was real. Then he ran, straight into my arms. I felt the weight of him hit my chest, and everything in me broke. He buried his face into my neck, his little fingers clutching at my sweater like he thought I might disappear again. "I've got you," I whispered over and over. "I've got you, I've got you, I've got you." He didn't speak, just held on. The cold, the officers, the flashing lights, it all vanished. It was just me and my son, together, alive. Benjy didn't let go for a long time. We sat on the back bumper of the ambulance, the wool blanket still wrapped around his shoulders, my arms around him like a second layer of skin. His body was warm, but his hands were ice. Every few minutes he would glance up at me as if checking to make sure I hadn't disappeared. "I missed you," I whispered, brushing a curl from his forehead. He nodded but didn't speak. His voice had folded in on itself. Too many nights alone, too many days without familiar sound. It didn't matter. I would wait. I would wait as long as it took for him to find his words again. One of the paramedics approached gently, holding out a small flashlight. "Mind if we take a quick look at him, just to be safe?" I nodded. "Go ahead." Benjy didn't protest. He sat still as they checked his eyes, his pulse, the bruise on his elbow, a faint yellow mark that looked like it had been there for days. "Nothing broken," the medic said quietly. "He's dehydrated, a little undernourished, but he's stable. We'll want to run labs just to be thorough." I nodded again, grateful, furious. How could someone let him get to this point? A sharp voice cut through the cold air behind us. "Donna." They brought her out in handcuffs, flanked by 2 officers. She looked thinner than I remembered. Her hair was stringy and damp, her clothes layered and mismatched. But her eyes, still sharp, still full of that same defiance I'd seen in court years ago when she signed over her parental rights without blinking. When her gaze landed on Benjy, something flickered. Not regret, not shame, possession. "You didn't even give me a chance," she said, loud enough for me to hear. I stood slowly, placed Benjy behind me. "You had your chance," I said. "You walked away. I got clean. You stayed gone." Donna stepped forward, but the officer at her side held her back. "I'm his mother." "No," I said, voice low and clear. "You're a stranger who stole him." That landed. Her face twisted, but she said nothing more. They led her toward the squad car. As she passed, I caught a glimpse of the small, filthy mattress visible through the front window of the house, a broken heater, an empty cereal box on the floor, a single paper snowflake taped to the wall. Benjy had been sleeping there, alone. My stomach turned. As they shut Donna into the car, I turned back to him. He was watching it all with wide, silent eyes. I knelt again, pulled him close. "It's over," I said. "You're safe now." His lips parted, then closed again. Not yet, but soon. Richard arrived a few minutes later, his headlights slicing through the darkness. He ran to us, arms already outstretched. When he saw Benjy, something in him broke too. He dropped to his knees and gathered us both in one sweeping motion, holding tight. Lila would still be sleeping when we got home, but I knew the moment she saw him again, she'd cry the way only children cry when they believe in miracles. And maybe tonight, so would I. Later, as we sat in the hospital under fluorescent lights and stale coffee, Moore approached with a clipboard. "We're recommending full psychiatric evaluation for Donna. Charges include child abduction, endangerment, fraud. Hazel will likely get a lesser sentence due to cooperation." I nodded. No anger in me anymore, just a hollow place where trust used to live. "Thank you," I said. He glanced at Benjy, then back at me. "You did everything you could." No, I thought. I did what I had to, because that's what mothers do. We walk through fire and snow and silence. We shatter, then piece ourselves back together for the ones we love. And when the world tries to take our children, we fight, and we get them back, no matter what. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No grand chandeliers, No dramatic wood paneling like in the movies, just rows of worn benches, fluorescent lights, and the faint hum of a heating vent that struggled to keep the January air at bay. Donna sat at the defendant's table, wrists free now but still shadowed by 2 officers. She wore a sweater 2 sizes too big and stared straight ahead like the walls might crack open and swallow her whole. Hazel sat 2 rows behind me, alone. Her hands clutched a folded tissue like it might hold her together. She hadn't looked at me once since I walked in. I didn't care. The judge was direct, middle-aged, clear-eyed, no tolerance for drama. She read the charges slowly and plainly. Child abduction, endangerment, identity fraud, obstruction. Donna pled guilty. Her public defender didn't waste time arguing for leniency. She didn't speak, not one word. Not to the judge, not to me. Not even when the sentencing was read aloud. 8 years, no possibility of parole for at least 5. It wasn't long. Not for what she did, but it was something. Hazel's hearing came next. She stood when her name was called, trembling slightly. Her lawyer explained the cooperation agreement, that she had confessed, that she had led authorities to evidence, that her role, while pivotal, was limited to the transfer, not the confinement. The judge listened, then turned to Hazel directly. "Do you understand the weight of your actions?" she asked. Hazel nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "You handed over a child, your own nephew, for money." "I wasn't thinking clearly," Hazel whispered. "I was desperate." Desperation is not an excuse, but it is a context, and in this case it's the difference between prison and probation. Hazel blinked. A single tear slid down her cheek. The judge continued. 1 year house arrest, 2 years probation, mandatory counseling. You'll report weekly and submit to regular welfare checks. Hazel mumbled something that sounded like thank you, then sat back down like the air had been pulled from her lungs. My parents were waiting outside the courtroom when I stepped into the hallway. My mother's coat was immaculate, as always. My father wore the same sweater he'd had since I was 12. They looked like a postcard from some version of normal I no longer recognized. "You really didn't have to push for this," Mom said before I could speak. Hazel didn't mean for it to go that far. I stared at her. She sold my son. She made a mistake. "No," I said quietly. She made a choice. And every day after, she made another one by staying silent. Dad shifted uncomfortably. "You're tearing the family apart." I let out a breath. Steady. Cold. "No, this family tore itself apart a long time ago. I just finally stopped pretending the cracks weren't there." They didn't follow me when I walked away. Outside, the sun was setting, pale gold across the courthouse steps. I pulled my coat tighter around me and closed my eyes for a moment. Justice doesn't bring peace. It doesn't undo the nights I thought Benji was dead. It doesn't repair the silence that's now settled between me and the people who raised me. But it's something. It's a line in the sand. It's a place to begin again. And that for now was enough. The house felt unfamiliar when we got back, not because it had changed, but because he had. Benji walked in slowly, holding my hand with the fragile grip of someone unsure if he belonged. He didn't look around. Didn't rush to the toy bin in the corner or ask for hot chocolate or his favorite blanket. He just stood there, quiet, his eyes scanning the room like it might vanish if he blinked too hard. Richard and Lila greeted him with soft voices and wide, cautious smiles. Lila handed him a small stuffed bear she'd been keeping on her bed ever since he disappeared. "This is for you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He waited for you too." Benji took it gently, nodded once, then walked past everyone into the living room. He curled up on the couch and stared out the window at nothing. I made him soup that night, the same kind he used to ask for when he was sick, tomato and alphabet pasta. He didn't eat it, just stirred it slowly, the spoon making slow, circular patterns like he was drawing something only he could see. When I tried to sit next to him, he shifted away, just slightly. Not enough to call it rejection. Just enough to remind me that time had passed, that damage had been done. He hadn't spoken since they pulled him from that house. Not a word. At first, the doctors called it trauma-induced mutism. Normal, they said, a protective response. Give it time. But no one tells you what to do in the silence. No one tells you how to mother a ghost of the child you lost, a child who is breathing but seems miles away. That night, after Richard and Lila had gone to bed, I found Benji curled up on the floor of his room, not in his bed, but next to it. He was still fully dressed, the stuffed bear clutched tight in his arms, his face pressed into the carpet. I sat beside him, careful not to make a sound, and for a while we just existed together in the dark. The moonlight pooled across the floor like spilled milk. I could hear the faint creak of the heater and the wind brushing against the windows. "I missed you," I whispered, not expecting a response. He didn't move. I rested my hand gently on his back. It was the first time I touched him without him pulling away. His breath hitched slightly, but he didn't flinch, so I stayed. "I'm here," I said. "I'm not going anywhere, not ever again." His little fingers twitched. I could feel him fighting something inside himself, the urge to trust versus the fear of what trust had cost him before. A few minutes passed, then his voice came, small, scratchy, barely audible. "Is the lady gone?" I closed my eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, she's gone." Silence again. Then, "Did you know where I was?" My throat tightened. I swallowed hard. "No, but I never stopped looking." He turned slightly toward me, just enough for his cheek to rest against my leg. "I had to be really quiet," he said. "She didn't like noise." I brushed a hand through his hair, slow and steady. "You don't have to be quiet anymore." He didn't answer, but that night, when I lifted him into bed and tucked the blanket around him, he didn't resist. He let me kiss his forehead, and just before I turned off the light, he whispered one last thing. "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" "I'll stay as long as you want." And I did. Because healing doesn't come all at once. It comes in whispers, in broken sentences, in quiet permission to hope again. And sometimes it begins with nothing more than staying. It started with a book. Lila came into the living room that afternoon with a paperback in her hand, its corners bent and the cover barely hanging on. It was one of Benji's old favorites, The Bear Who Lost His Hat. I remembered reading it to him so many times I could still recite it in my sleep. He was sitting on the couch, knees tucked under his chin, eyes fixed on the fireplace even though it wasn't lit. Lila didn't say much. She just climbed up beside him, opened the book, and began to read. Her voice was soft, a little unsure at first, but steady. Benji didn't look at her, not right away. But I saw the way his body relaxed, just slightly, like the sound of her voice was a thread tugging him back toward something familiar. I stood in the kitchen, pretending to stir soup I wasn't cooking, not wanting to interrupt whatever delicate magic was happening between them. "I'm on chapter 2, Lila said after a while. "The part where the bear thinks he left his hat on the moon." Benji shifted, just enough to glance sideways. "That part's funny," he whispered. It was the first time I'd heard him laugh, just a breath of it, quick, fragile, but real. Lila looked at him, eyes wide, smile breaking across her face like a sunrise. "You remember?" He nodded. "Want to read the next page?" He hesitated, then leaned in closer to see the words. I stepped back from the kitchen, tears pricking behind my eyes, letting the moment be theirs. That evening, we had dinner at the table for the first time in months. Benji didn't eat much, but he sat with us. He let Richard help him cut his chicken. He let Lila pour him juice. He even asked, softly, if we still had those cookies with the red sprinkles. "I'll make some tomorrow," I said. "Just for you." He looked at me for a long time. Not with suspicion, not with fear, just with a quiet kind of curiosity, like he was still trying to remember who I had been to him, and who I was now. After dinner, we all curled up on the couch. Lila brought every blanket in the house, layered them on top of us like a fortress. We put on the Polar Express. Benji laid his head on my shoulder halfway through, his fingers tangled in the hem of my sweater. Richard reached across the back of the couch and rested a hand on my arm. No one said anything. There was no need. The silence in the room no longer felt heavy. It felt whole. Later that night, when I was tucking Benji into bed, he looked at me with those wide, tired eyes and asked, "Do I have to leave again?" My chest tightened. "No," I said. "You're home now, and you're staying." He stared at the ceiling for a moment, then whispered, "Even if I don't talk a lot?" "Even then." He turned toward me, his voice smaller now. "Even if I forget stuff?" "Especially then." He reached for my hand. "Even if I have bad dreams?" I leaned down and kissed his forehead. "I'll be right here." He nodded, satisfied, then closed his eyes, and just like that, for the first time since he came home, he fell asleep without me having to stay beside him. I lingered in the doorway, watching his chest rise and fall under the blanket. The same stuffed bear still tucked in beside him. The house was quiet, peaceful, but not empty. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to break. I felt like we were building something again, something that could last. I used to write in my journal every night, not for anyone to read, just a way to make sense of the noise, the lists, the worries, the moments I didn't want to forget and the ones I didn't know how to carry. After Benji disappeared, I stopped. Writing felt dangerous, like giving shape to my fear would make it more real, like putting words to what I'd lost would confirm it was gone for good. But tonight, after the house went quiet, after Benji finally drifted off without a nightmare, after Richard kissed my forehead and whispered, "I'm proud of you," I opened that old notebook again. The pages smelled like dust and lavender. I flipped past the blank ones and found the last entry I'd written, May 29th. Benji had just won a certificate for Most Thoughtful Camper at his day camp. I wrote about how he helped another kid who lost his lunchbox. I wrote about how proud I was, about how he told me very seriously that being kind was more important than winning races. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I picked up the pen and started writing again. December 28th. We're home. All of us. I paused. The words didn't feel big enough for what had happened, but I kept going. Benji is quiet, but he's trying. He let Lila read to him today. He asked for cookies. He let me sit beside him while he slept. Small things. But they feel like miracles. Hazel was sentenced last week. Donna is in custody. There's a part of me that wants to be done with them, to erase their names from my mouth. But healing, I'm learning, doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without reopening the wound. I used to think love was what held a family together. But now I know it's the choice to keep showing up, even when you're scared, even when you're tired, even when it feels easier to walk away. Benji will need time, so will I. But time isn't the enemy. Silence isn't either. We just have to listen for what's underneath it. I stopped writing, looked out the window. The snow had started falling again, gentle, steady, like the sky wasn't in a hurry anymore. I thought about everything we'd survived, about the kind of grief that doesn't shout but lingers in the corners, about the guilt I still carried for not seeing what Hazel was capable of, for trusting her too much, or not enough. But I also thought about the way Lila had wrapped a blanket around her brother, the way Richard had stood by me even when I pushed him away, the way Benji had finally, softly asked, "Will you stay?" I thought about how I said yes and how I meant it. Because love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet presence in a dark room. Sometimes it's a whispered bedtime promise. Sometimes it's a bowl of soup no one touches, but you make it anyway. I turned back to the page and added one last line. Love is the only thing that can heal what's been broken. Then I closed the journal. Not because the story was over, but because we were finally ready to begin a new one. Together. It had been exactly 1 year. 1 year since the Christmas that never arrived. 1 year since the night the snow fell so quietly it felt like it was trying not to wake the world. Since the toy train appeared beneath the tree like a ghost. Since the truth began unraveling thread by thread until what was left could no longer hide. And now, here we were again. Snow blanketed the backyard in thick, untouched layers. The trees stood frozen like they, too, remembered what had happened in this house. But there was no heaviness in the air today. No shadows waiting at the corners. Just quiet and peace. Inside, Lila and Benji were decorating cookies at the kitchen table. She was in charge of frosting, he was in charge of sprinkles. Richard stood behind them, pretending not to sneak any into his mouth, but failing miserably. They laughed. Real laughter. Not the careful, cautious kind we'd grown used to after Benji came home, but full, round sound that filled the house without apology. It was the kind of sound I thought we might never hear again. I stood by the window holding a mug of peppermint tea, watching the snow fall gently across the yard. There's something about snow that makes everything look new, as if the world is offering you a clean page whether you deserve it or not. A year ago, I didn't believe in magic. I believed in facts, in routine, in logic. I believed in locking the door twice, checking the stove 3 times, planning everything so precisely that chaos wouldn't dare creep in. But chaos doesn't need an invitation. It finds you anyway, It found me through the crack in a family bond I didn't know was breaking, through a sister I trusted, through a woman I thought I'd forgotten, and it nearly took everything. There were moments I didn't think I'd survive it. Nights I stood in Benji's empty room with my hands shaking and my heart so loud it drowned out the silence. Days I couldn't make eye contact with Richard, conversations I couldn't finish, sleep I couldn't find. But we made it, not in the way that feels cinematic or triumphant. We made it in the small, ordinary, invisible ways that healing happens. We stayed. That's what saved us. Not a miracle, not a twist of fate, just love that didn't leave the room. Benji still had nightmares sometimes. He'd call out in his sleep, mumble things we couldn't always understand. But they were less frequent now, less sharp. Like whatever he'd carried was beginning to let go of him, little by little. Lila became his anchor, his flashlight. She had a way of reaching him none of us could quite replicate. Maybe because she never treated him like someone broken. She treated him like her brother. And Richard? He showed up, again and again, in the most patient, steady, everyday ways. He never asked me to forget. He just held the door open every time I needed space and stayed on the other side of it until I was ready to return. I sipped my tea slowly, letting the warmth reach my chest. The world outside was white and still. Inside, the clock ticked. The smell of sugar and cinnamon lingered. Lila shrieked in protest as Benji dumped too many red sprinkles on her carefully decorated reindeer cookie. I smiled. Last year, I stood at the same window and wondered if I would ever see my son again. Today, he was 5 feet away, covered in sugar, laughing. Maybe this is what a miracle looks like. Not thunder, not stars, not fireworks. Just a child returned. A family mended. A home whole again. And snow that falls as if it's never fallen before. The living room was filled with the soft crackle of a fireplace video playing on the TV. No real flames, just digital embers flickering on the screen. But it didn't matter. The feeling was the same. Warmth, safety, familiar comfort that wrapped around us like a worn blanket. Benji and Lila were sprawled out on the rug in front of the tree, surrounded by cookie crumbs, glitter, and half-finished drawings taped to gift boxes. Their laughter bounced off the walls, overlapping and chasing itself like wind chimes in a breeze. Lila was trying to teach Benji how to fold an origami star. He wasn't really listening. He was giggling too hard, pretending the paper was a mustache and making exaggerated detective voices. "Sir," he said in a mock-serious tone, holding the folded shape under his nose, "I believe the sugar cookie is guilty." Lila collapsed into a fit of laughter, clutching her stomach. Richard was in the armchair, watching them with the kind of smile that comes from deep relief. Not the surface-level kind you show at dinner parties, but the real thing, the kind that settles behind your ribs and makes breathing feel easier. I sat beside him, my legs tucked up under me, a second cup of peppermint tea growing cold in my hands. Benji looked up at me, eyes wide with delight. "Mom, guess what?" "What?" "I'm not scared anymore." The words came out of him like light, pure and unexpected. I froze for a second, stunned by their clarity. "You're not?" He shook his head, his curls bouncing. "I used to be, but now, it feels like the bad parts are way back there." He waved vaguely toward the hallway, as if fear was something he'd left behind in another room. I nodded slowly, trying to blink away the tears that came too fast. "I'm really proud of you," I said. He shrugged like it was no big deal and went back to folding paper with Lila. Richard reached over and took my hand, his thumb brushing the back of it in slow, thoughtful circles. "They're okay," he whispered. "We're okay." I let my head rest against his shoulder. For so long, I'd carried the weight of what we'd lost. I measured time in before and after. I wondered if Benji would ever sleep through the night again, or if Lila would stop flinching every time the phone rang. I wondered if we'd ever sit like this, easy, whole, still. And now we were. Not perfect, not untouched, but present. The kind of present that takes effort, that requires forgiveness and patience and choosing each other again and again. Later that evening, Benji asked if we could go outside. "Just for a little," he said. "I want to feel the snow." We bundled up in coats and scarves and boots and stepped into the backyard. The snow had softened into a powdery hush. The whole yard looked like a blank page waiting to be written on. Benji ran ahead, arms out like wings. Lila chased after him, shouting, "You can't escape justice, Detective Sugar Cookie!" He laughed so hard he fell, landing in a puff of white. Richard followed them out, tossing a snowball into the air, not aiming for anyone, just letting it break apart above his head like fireworks made of frost. I stood on the porch, watching them. My family. Not the one I started with, not the one I once imagined, but the one we became, built from brokenness and mended with love. Benji stopped suddenly, looked up at me, then ran back toward the porch. He threw his arms around my waist and hugged me tight, his cheek pressing into my coat. "I love you, Mom." My throat caught. "I love you too, sweetheart. More than anything." He pulled back just enough to look up at me, his cheeks red from the cold, eyes shining. "You came for me." "I always would," I said. And I meant it, because the storm had passed, the fear had quieted, and what remained was us, together, exactly where we belonged. Later that night, after the snow had stopped and the kids had finally been wrestled into pajamas, I stood at Benji's bedroom door. He was asleep, one arm flung across the stuffed bear Lila had given him last Christmas, the one that waited all those months, just like the rest of us. His mouth was slightly open, breath slow and steady. One leg peeked out from beneath the blanket. Typical Benji. It was so quiet you could hear the house breathing. I stepped inside just to sit for a moment. There's something sacred about watching a child sleep. Like time pauses for you to catch up, like the world for once agrees to be still. I looked around the room. The paper stars Lila had made still hung from the ceiling. A hand-drawn family picture was taped above the dresser. We were all stick figures smiling. Me, Richard, Lila, Benji. And between Richard and me, a heart that said real love. I traced that heart with my eyes and felt something shift inside me. A kind of soft landing, a letting go. I sat down on the edge of the bed. "You came back," I whispered. He didn't stir, but I kept talking, gently, like maybe part of him could still hear me. "There were nights I thought I wouldn't see this again, that I'd only have your voice in memory, your laugh in echoes, that my arms would never feel this full again." My fingers brushed through his hair. "I blamed myself, for not seeing it, for trusting too easily, for letting you out of my sight. But the truth is, no one ever thinks the people they love will become the ones they fear." I looked at him, this small, strong boy who had survived something no child should. "But you didn't break," I whispered. "You bent, maybe. You folded in on yourself, but you didn't break." I wiped a tear from my cheek, not bothering to hide it. "You're the bravest person I know." Outside the window, the snow had begun to sparkle under a clear moon. It looked like crushed diamonds scattered across the yard. I leaned closer and kissed Benji's forehead. "You were never really gone," I said softly. "You were just waiting for me to find you again." He stirred then, just a little. His fingers twitched, and he mumbled something I couldn't quite catch. I stayed a few minutes longer, watching him breathe. Then I rose, pulled the blanket back over his legs, and walked to the doorway. At the threshold, I turned back one last time. My heart was full, not in the way that bursts with joy, in the way that holds everything, sorrow and love, fear and gratitude, the knowledge that we lost so much, and still found our way back. A family, I realized, isn't built on perfection. It's built on showing up, on choosing one another, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And as I closed the door, I heard my own words echo inside me. Family isn't measured by blood, it's measured by choice and the courage to protect it. The screen fades to black. A final image appears, a still photo of Benji and Lila making snow angels in the yard, their arms spread wide, eyes bright with laughter. Then, in quiet white letters against the darkness, "Family isn't measured by blood, it's measured by choice and the courage to protect it." And just like that, the story ends. Not in tragedy, not in fireworks, but in snow, in stillness, in love that stayed. The house is quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that used to press down on me like a weight, but the gentle kind. The kind that lives between laughter and sleep, when everyone is safe in their own rooms and the world feels softer somehow. I walk slowly through the hallway, past the family photos we've hung back up. Last winter, I couldn't bear to look at them. They were reminders of everything I'd lost. Now they feel different, not perfect, not untouched, but proof of what survived. In the kitchen, the last plate of cookies is half eaten, crumbs scattered across the counter. Lila's handwriting is taped to the fridge. Benji's welcome home cookies do not steal. She spelled steal wrong. He noticed. He laughed. And for a moment, everything was exactly as it should be. I stop at the window, mug of tea warming my hands. Outside, the snow glitters under the moonlight, spread across the yard like a promise. It reminds me that seasons pass whether we're ready or not. That loss can bury us, but it can also reveal what we're made of. There were nights I thought we would never come back from this. Nights when I believed hope was something foolish, something cruel. But tonight, looking at the snow, I know better. We didn't just come back, we became something stronger. Benji will carry scars, I know that. Some will fade, some won't. But he also carries courage now, the kind most adults never find. And I will carry it with him, every step. Hazel's absence lingers, my parents' silence too. But I've learned that not every wound needs to be mended. Some are meant to be left behind so we can grow around them. Family is not always given. Sometimes it's chosen. Sometimes it's protected with everything you have. Sometimes it's rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. I think about that as I sip my tea and hear the faint creak of Benji turning in his sleep down the hall. The storm is over, and for the first time in a long time, I believe the calm will last. If there's one thing this past year has taught me, it's that family isn't a guarantee. It's not a bloodline, or a last name, or the house you grew up in. Family is the people who stay, the ones who choose you day after day, even when it's messy, even when it hurts. I used to think strength meant holding everything together on my own. I thought if I didn't break, then no one else could either. But real strength isn't about silence. It's about admitting when you're scared. It's about reaching out when you'd rather close in. It's about trusting someone enough to let them see the cracks. There were moments when I felt completely alone, when I thought no one could understand what it meant to search for your child and find nothing but questions. But I wasn't alone. Richard was there, steady as stone. Lila was there with her unshakable hope. And even Benji, though he was missing, was there too, in every decision I made, in every breath I fought to take. I know some of you listening might carry your own storms, maybe not the same as mine, but storms all the same. Betrayal, loss, silence, distance. Maybe you wonder if you'll ever feel whole again. I can't promise you that it will be easy. Healing never is. But I can tell you this, even broken things can shine. Even shattered families can build something new. We're proof of that. Every night when I tuck Benji in and he whispers, "Stay," I realize healing isn't about erasing what happened. It's about building a future that can hold the weight of the past. And when I see Richard holding both kids on the couch, when I hear their laughter bouncing through this house, I know we've built something strong enough to last. So if you take anything from our story, let it be this. Love is not just a feeling. It's a decision, a daily act of courage. It's choosing to show up, even when it's easier to walk away. And when you choose love, you choose life. The snow is falling again tonight. Not heavy, not hurried. Just steady, quiet, certain. I stand at the window and watch it cover the yard, the trees, the roof of this house. One flake at a time until the world looks new. That's what healing feels like. Not sudden, not perfect. Just small moments, layered over time, until the pain softens and hope takes its place. When I look at Benji and Lila now, chasing each other across the living room, I realize something I didn't before. The miracle was never in the snow. It wasn't in the courtroom or the confession or even in the moment we found him. The miracle was in the courage to love, to keep choosing family, even when betrayal tried to break us. That is the heart of our story. Family isn't measured by blood. It's measured by choice, and by the strength to protect what matters most. If you're listening to this and carrying your own storm, don't give up. Don't believe the silence means you're alone. Reach out, choose love, choose courage. Because even in the coldest winter, there's a way back to warmth. Thank you for walking through this story with me. If it touched you, if it reminded you of the power of family and resilience, I invite you to share it. Subscribe, leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from. And most of all, hold your loved ones close tonight. Because sometimes the greatest miracle isn't out there waiting for us. Sometimes it's already sitting at our table,